All right, welcome back to the Double Swing. It's season 3, I believe, unless I've forgotten a season entirely, Yumi. But I think we're on the third season. As your two-time reigning defending champion, it's going to be another fun year of making picks and hoping Yumi really likes Virtus Pro again. Joining us for our inaugural episode of 2025, it's going to be dusT, who is a first-time guest on the show. I'm very happy to have him on here. Great job at the major with the analyst desk segment. Bit of an inspiration. I was like, yeah, we need to get that guy on. Glad we could. So thank you for joining us. Hope you had a good time over your break and looking forward to another year of quality CS.
Indeed. I mean, I think right now things are in a pretty good spot. I think we got a lot of teams that can be competitive, and so excited to follow the storylines.
I'm
Yeah.
also mad VP hate watching now, so now that James is gone, I have no attachment anymore.
I'm sure you don't. I'm sure you're not excited to pick this team 7 or 8 times throughout the year and only get rewarded once with any points.
Hey,
Yes,
Flamus is pretty good. Flamus is pretty
Flamus is pretty good. Although I did tweet about this, about how electronic, potentially this is new roster. Maybe it'll be another flop added to the resume. And I get immediately a response telling me, no. If this team sucks, it's not because of electronic. It's because Flamus is ass. And I was like, really? That's your take? Wow. Anyway,
You could have said Flit was ass, and there's an argument.
There's a case.
Yeah.
The recent demos don't suggest anything about Flamus being a big issue. But the hit, we'll save Virtus Pro for another episode. They're not in this one. They didn't make it this far. We are only doing the Blast Bounty land portion, as you can tell, because the groups are over. And we've got the 8 teams listed below me to pick from. Are you tired of looking like a chump in game? Sick of opening cases and getting trash skins? Check out Skin Club via my link in the description for a 7% deposit bonus. For gamers 18 or older, Skin Club is a case opening service who run a provably fair opening algorithm to give you truly random outcomes. Skin Club's battles mode has been upgraded, adding new things like crazy, team, and share modes just to make every roll a little more intense and a little more fun. I played a battle or two and managed to win some pretty crazy skins and upgraded a group of them into a gorgeous MP9 hot rod. Perfect for some gold stickers. There is an awards event going on right now, so you can earn event points just by playing on the site. These points can be redeemed for cases, skins, and entries into huge giveaways. Skin Club accept a wide variety of payment methods from cards and PayPal to skins themselves, as well as a range of crypto coins. Remember to play responsibly using the self-care tools provided, and use my link in the description to get a 7% bonus. A big thank you to Skin Club for supporting my channel. Leading off the show is going to be Yumi with the number 1 pick. Come on, take it away. Make it a good one. Start off the year on a high.
I'm gonna do what I did at the start of the last season, and I'm gonna pick Spirit because, listen, I've had doubts about Spirit through their calendar year. I did think for a while they should have removed Magix. I am on record citing I thought Hobbit was a good replacement for him, but Magix is good vibes, and he had an insane major. And I think because of that major, from what I've seen, they've actually more actively, they were always kind of trying to set him up in clutch situations, but I think they're more actively putting him in winning positions in clutches more, instead of sort of teeing up Zontix, where, Zontix had his shortcomings earlier in the year, and I think struggled to sort of wrap his mental around finding the I guess important rounds to sort of really lock in on. Magix is, I think, going through a little bit of a resurgence in his career, and right now the Spirit team is looking incredibly lethal with Donk is a powerhouse, player of the year, and all of that, very rightly deserved. But if you have, I think this was always the case, if you have Magix or Zontix chiming in alongside a Donk and Shiro, this team is always going to have a more than enough firepower to close out against the best teams that we have in the circuit right now. So I think Spirit for me are a very comfortable first pick lock. Best team in the world currently, maybe not on the tactics level, but firepower and just enough misdirection sprinkled in. This team is kind of, it's hard to beat.
I mean, yeah, but I do have a question. So, dusT, we always hear this. We talked about it a lot last year about Chopper as an IGL. Not a lot of people seem to trust him. There's always been sort of mixed narratives about Halley as well. Where do you fall on all this? Do you think Spirit are weak tactically, or is it more of a perception than anything else that really brings them down?
Ooh, that's a tough one. I mean, I would certainly put Chopper behind like some of the other top 5 IGLs, as far as like, if I'm comparing him to like an Alexi B or a Shuhei or, something along those lines. But I don't think that he's like on hate watch, like Snacks or something like that on G2 by any stretch of the imagination. I think that if anything, throughout the course of Shanghai, I actually saw them, and I don't know if this came from the coaching or if it came from Chopper, they actively did like make some pretty big adjustments to kind of try to facilitate Donk even more and to kind of like tidy up their map pool a little bit. So like, for example, Chopper was a lot more willing to go in first, you know, kind of towards the back half of the year and throughout their time in Shanghai, as opposed to just kind of throwing Donk in first all the time, you know. And then on Mirage, for instance, they really kind of restructured how they played their T sides, how they were facilitating Donk. Again, Chopper being more willing to kind of go in first. And so my point is I saw them make strides on certain maps and kind of optimize how they use Donk. So I'm not, you know, by any means like a Chopper hater or anything like that. I think if anything, I saw progress. You know, I saw signs of improvement. I saw a team that was willing to adapt as opposed to kind of just get stuck in the same place and just keep trying to play that way. I think Mirage is probably the biggest example of this, where they like really turn that map around, like towards the end of the year. So no, I think that they're pretty solid in that regard.
I want to sort of just note, I think Spirit, and we talked about this after they sort of failed in Cologne. They actually were underutilizing Donk, and to me, that sort of reeked of trying to find other weapons in the toolkit and other ways to approach the rounds. And I think the medium that they probably found at the major was early round fast aggression. That's all Chopper. You know, mid to late rounds when you have a bit more of an understanding of where the next fight is going to come, that's where they're going to use Donk on a hard entry. They're not trying to have him be this run in and find heads fast type of player anymore. That's where the dynamic shift seems to have, I guess, occurred. And I also wonder whether, you know, from those events leading up to Shanghai, Donk might have just gone, why are we doing this, guys? Like, actually, just let me go in and frag people, because I'm really fucking good at it. Because he sort of vented that frustration at the major, and yeah, he had a swagger to him in a way, because he knew he could do it, and he did.
Yeah, 32% opening rate over the last sort of 40 maps. That includes the major, that includes these 4 maps they played here. Ridiculous win rate, especially on opening kills, it has to be said. And, you know, the shocking stat of last year, the stat that really impressed me, sold me the most on anything Donk could do. It's not a rating, it's not an impact stat. It's the EDR 444, as he goes by on his username on Twitter, his explosive or raw aim duel stats that he has. Just aim duel when 2 players are looking at each other, a fair fight as he calls it. They swing, they fight. Donk wins those fights at a rate above even the best AWPers. The AWPers dominate that. Obviously, fair fight, everyone's looking at each other. The snipers are going to win. Donk, the only exception. Just truly a dominant fragger who put up absurd numbers and started this year on the same vein. So I fully back that pick, Yumi, honestly. I'm just waiting for the visa issue now, because you've picked them. This happened to you several times last year, just getting screwed by the visa, screwed by an illness, screwed by something. And
if somehow they end up with Baz and Hallie again, I will be fuming. I mean, at least maybe it might be Keosuke instead, but...
Ooh, yeah. They do have a different set of academy kids, but hey, a last-second replacement into Denmark, we know that's not going to be easy. So
yeah,
fingers crossed you do get the full force Spirit, and hopefully for your sakes they get you a point, but I'm obviously hoping for that last-second BS.
I feel like we would have heard something by now if something messed up. I feel like it, because we've already heard about a couple other teams' visa issues. So like I feel like we would have heard some rumblings by now already.
But
I think
Copenhagen, didn't you pick them as well, Yumi? Copenhagen, and they were sick.
Yeah, I think it was for, God, I want to say full group or I guess spring groups. It was something
Spring groups
like
was
that.
the initial, two players had to be replaced. But then Copenhagen, they also had it came out a little later that they were sick between the groups and the playoffs or the challengers.
Yeah,
and the
something like that. Yeah,
and so they end up losing to FaZe after 2 days of no practice. And that seems like it would have been right up your alley, that kind of misfortune.
it's fine. It's a new year. There's no curses. Curses don't exist. It's a new year. 2025. Everything just works.
Sure. We hope for your sake it does. Let's put it that way. Because I am obviously doubtful. That was too much last year. That was far too much. There was no way you've pissed someone off.
I couldn't beat the allegations. Pick Navi, bomb out. Just I couldn't win.
No, you couldn't. So that brings me to my pick, and I don't know how to go with this. So I know dusT, you're about to have 2 in a row. And so if I feel like if I leave my favorite open, they might be gone. I leave my favorite underdog open. They might be gone too. So I might end up with none of my favorites if I try to get sneaky with it. Oh. Yeah, you know what? I'm just going to play it safe. I'm going to take as a favorite Vitality
Good call.
for a number of reasons. One cheeky one that's going to, annoy a few beret wearers, but, they're still mad about me deciding that ZywOo, I've created a fake narrative that ZywOo can't perform in playoffs. Realistically, not what I ever said, but that's okay. We'll talk about Vitality in this context because this is a studio event, start to finish. As we all know, a certain little French man, is an absolute unit when it comes to studio events. He breaks rating records, does absurd things, wins second place MVPs. So I am fully confident that I will get the proper, fired up, full power version of Vitality when I pick them. Now, I did think they looked a bit unconvincing initially with ROPS. Like the first kind of match I watched, who was it they played? Metasport, yeah. They needed basically to go the entire way, all series long, which, yeah, Metasport are okay. They've got a couple of decent players, but they've just rebuilt. They're honestly looking weaker than they have done even towards the end of last year, before losing Nilo, obviously. This was not a very strong Metasport. They should have been crushed, absolutely swept and put away. But I saw a bit of awkwardness in Flame Z and his sort of slightly new roles. It's like they've gone, we're not going to completely give you Con and Mirage. We're going to give you slightly more access to Con and Mirage. Rather than just leaving him purely as an anchor, they've slowly started transitioning him into star roles. And I'm just getting a little frustrated watching these guys play. The riflers weren't quite smooth and perfect, but I can't deny the top guy is going to be on full form. We're going to get the best of ZywOo. We still have talent on talent on talent in the rifles. We have a good caller. This should work out. Now, I obviously did have Spirit as my number one team as well coming into this tournament, but I think my number two, given what I've seen from both Navi and G2, is going to be Vitality. The conditions are right. Make an upset happen.
I'll let you go first, dusT, if you want.
Yeah, I mean, I think I think Vitality is kind of an obvious answer to pick up in the sense that, look, they were like the core of this team was the most consistent team last year. They were consistently placing like in the top four, pretty much every tournament they played. There was only like maybe one or two exceptions for the entire year. They won Cologne. The only dark mark against Vitality was really the fact that they didn't get more wins, right? They only had the one trophy at Cologne. Meanwhile, you had Spirit. They won 4 titles, including a major. Obviously, Navi, had 4 titles, including a major as well. They had that 6 finals in a row run, kind of the end off the year before they kind of crashed. So it was one of those things where like you just kind of thought Vitality should aspire to more. But then you keep hearing all these rumblings about how bad the environment was, how people weren't getting along, all these quotes coming out about how it didn't feel like a real team anymore, all of this jazz. And like despite the fact that they still had plenty of firepower and a really good map pool, just for whatever reason they couldn't come up with wins. Like they kept, losing in finals. They kept, losing in semis, like to good teams. Don't get me wrong. It's not they were getting beat up by nobodies, but they just couldn't like find that next edge to get them more wins on the board for the year. But in theory, though, they pretty much had everything that you could want, right? I mean, as far as like you got one of the top 3 players in the world on your team, you have, Flames, who is one of the better entries in the world. You'd put a couple of names ahead of him, but he's still very good for his role. Mezzi, I thought, was better the second half of the year compared to the first half of the year, and it's a fine supportive element. So, like, there was a lot of things going for them, but I think ROPS, like, if you had to replace Spinks, ROPS is like one of the better people you could have found to put in that position, even though some of his spots kind of overlap more with Mezzi than Spinks. But it feels like from what I've seen, they've been able to kind of balance that out pretty well to make both pieces comfortable, and they're both performing pretty well so far. So yeah, I mean, I think there was already a lot going for Vitality, and the one move they made isn't one that sets them back initially. Like that, it seems like they're able to get out the gate pretty quick. And, yeah, they did struggle a little bit against Metasport, but it's their first best of 3. It's online. Metasport does have some talent on it. Like they're a pretty well put together team. So I'm not too phased by how that whole match played out. And I do think that like going into, this playoff bracket, Vitality has to be next to Spirit, like one of your favorites to win the whole thing. So yeah, I think that's a good pick, obviously.
Yeah, I immediately, when I saw the ROPS move, I kind of thought, could this be the start of the ROPS Blame F arc, where, statistically the guy might do well, but he might not gel well with the team. And I had to sort of reel myself back in, because I think Rops is far better at being dynamic on an intuitive level. I think, Blame sort of slots into like lurking all of the time, whereas I think Rops has battled out of that behavior and has been one of the more explosive players at times from FaZe. So for me, I actually think Rops is going to concede a lot of space so that he slots in well with this squad. And it's just going to be about how well he can kind of produce in the positions that are remaining. And there'll be concessions from the team, of course, to allow for a player of his caliber. But I think he's done with the whole phase. We all respect each other, almost complacency. That now that he's working with somebody like ZywOo, it is just about achieving a major. I guess the same could be argued with the move that FaZe themselves made. I guess with Elige, is that both those players are kind of done playing nice, and are going to try and do what they can to win. So I think this team, for me, is it's probably not time right now. But I think come Katowice, I'd have more faith that a Vitality could actually play up to that caliber, because I think unfortunately there were moments in that Metasport game where, well, I think they had like a 10-2 CT half, and then Metasport almost brought it into an overtime when Vitality were on the attack. And I just think with the caliber of players, Vitality shouldn't even be stretched that close. And Rops himself also didn't get a lot of great production in that side on that side of the map. So I guess I'm a little worried that there's maybe a communication barrier, or like just a chemistry link that hasn't quite happened yet for Vitality for them to succeed here.
So far, the T side has been the most difficult for them to really get started on. I mean, we've seen CT side. Well, we heard the conversation firstly from Apex about talking about Rops having more plays set up for him, and necessarily that Spinks might have had on the team. And you saw that on Train, the key example, that CT side Train. Rops is being very aggressive, and it's all very intentional and set up by Apex to get him aggressive towards B, which is his anchor spot technically. But he's being pushed out into the lane, or whatever we call that section. I haven't really mastered callouts on that far deep into the map. But the upper B T sort of setup area, he's getting very aggressive out there. He's getting flashed. They're getting Util set up just to make him have an advantage in those fights. And that worked brilliantly. But as soon as they move on to the T side, he's not really got much going on, that he's not finding any kills. It looks very difficult, sluggish. So they still haven't gotten that up and coming, but the fact that they have already got some CT sides looking so strong probably is a very reassuring thing, especially if you're on the team. Like already, we've got half the game starting to look good. Robs feels comfortable making certain plays. We can rely on him to have impact. I think that's going to be key for them going forward. Just figure out that T side. I think that's going to be the difficult part.
Kind of feels like having a stand-in at the moment, I think, is the best way.
The part
to
that he's
describe
ultra comfortable on, we've got. Next
Yeah.
is just the difficult side. Yeah, that's going to be a bit more tough.
I feel like it's map specific. I feel like their dusT and Inferno T sides were already pretty up to speed. I feel like in both of those maps, Rops pretty much was a 1-for-1 for Spinks as far as the spots that he was playing. So like in those situations, I think they were able to do a little bit better. Whereas Mirage, they're doing a lot of swapping around. Like, basically Mezzi has changed his position to kind of give Rops what he normally plays on the T side, and then Train is just new, right? Like everyone's still kind of trying to figure that one out. So I think it is a little bit map specific on like where they look a little bit sluggish versus where they already look very polished. And so it's just about, it's one of those things where like whenever you're changing your roster and you also have a map pool change taking place in the pool at the same time, it becomes a really tough spot where like you're trying to implement a new player into the team and just get like a foundation built with this guy and, build up, like protocols and like, or kind of catch him up to speed on how you want to do certain things. And then at the same time, you're also trying to learn a new map as a unit and figure out a way to implement that into your pool. Because, Vitality is one of those teams where, they were actually quite good on Vertigo. They were very good on Vertigo. So it's like when you lose that, then you have to kind of consider like, well, what are we going to do? And it seems like they have been willing to play Train, obviously. So I think it's just kind of a matter of time before they kind of figure things out.
Well, I hope so. And I hope that matter of time is Thursday, roughly.
Now-ish would be great.
Now would be lovely for me. I need those points straight away. dusT, you have 2 picks. Take it away.
Oh, this is obvious. Like, if my choices are Navi and G2, like, pretty obviously gonna be going with Navi on this one. And look, here's the thing. Like, one, they didn't make any roster changes, so in that sense, they shouldn't have to really be like retooling anything as far as like really making like major sweeping changes, implement a new player into the team. Um, obviously, like we can't really glean too much from the qualifier as far as like how well they played or anything like that. They had kind of a weird bracket in that regard. But I just have to believe that at some point this team recovers, right? I mean, this is a team that was in contention to be team of the year last year, winning the major, having that 6 straight finals run. But yeah, let's be honest, they crashed and burned after that. Like they crashed and burned at the Blast World Finals. They didn't even make the playoffs of the major. They got beat out by Heroic in that crazy best of 3. So like they definitely slipped off the pedal. And I felt like a lot of it was because like Bit and JL just fell off at like the worst possible time. Like they were on a heater for the majority of the year as like 2 legit top 10 players in the world that were very much like just great playmakers on the extremities, great, in Bit's case, a fantastic anchor on the CT side and closer. Like they had so much going for them. They obviously were tactically one of the best teams. They had one of the better map pools. But then when they needed it most, like their Ancient failed them against Heroic, even though they were one of the best Ancient teams in the world. Also, their Mirage completely flip-flopped. They were one of the best Mirage teams in the world, and then all of a sudden it became a handicap for them. So there's definitely a lot of things you could point to that you would say, wow, like this team really slipped in some areas. But I do think if they can course correct their Mirage, they still do have a really good map pool. I think they have a good distribution of talent. It seems like Bit and JL are back in better form. Obviously, we won't know that for sure until they get on land and see how well they play there. But I just think that they're the more well-rounded team, the better team tactically. And as long as like Bit and JL show up in proper form, I think that, this team should perform well enough to do pretty good. So that's
Well,
why I'm going to take them.
just as an addendum, I mean, they did win Team of the Year by
They won
HLTV.
HLTV's team of the year, yeah.
Yeah, Vitality weren't in that conversation. It was
No.
Navi G2 Spirit instead.
In that order, which is a part of the debate, fury, wrath that some people have felt.
Yeah, well, all about trophies and how many you get, right? That's really the metric I mean, it's the best metric we have to gauge something like that, or general placements. I don't disagree. Navi were definitely a very consistent team, and they did have a tapering off towards the end of the year. I may be a little surprised they didn't try and get, some Pious maybe for Wonderful. I think there were potential roster moves that actually could have been staked for this Navi. I mean, Simple is still in the wilderness, but I actually don't think they want him. Maybe because of atmosphere reasons. But I do agree. I do agree. This team will course correct at a certain point because they are probably the most tactical team we have at the tier 1 rung of Counter Strike right now. And I mean, everybody has a lot of faith in Blade. It's kind of not even a, oh, I've got faith in Blade. Yeah, I'm a part of the flock of people that also have that same respect for him. And him and Alexia are a fearsome combo, as I thought they would be sooner at the start of CS2, but they started getting good when I stopped believing, and that was all a part of the 2024 curse for me. So,
to be fair, justifiably so, because it's not just that they tapered off at the end, they also started pretty terribly. Of the first 4 big events they played, they won 1 and crashed out in groups at 3 others. Like I'm still raging against this consistent narrative. They were consistent for 4 months in a 12-month year. Like we need to put the brakes on that one. But no, I think this is the period of time where you want Navi. This is when all the teams that have new players, as we've discussed with Vitality, are going to be embedding things, figuring things out. Navi don't have that issue. And sure, their big problem is, it's the one that rears its head, if the system isn't perfect, who's going to bail you out and win you rounds? Like, if you haven't got the perfect prep, execution, call, who's actually going to be a playmaker? It needs to be Bit and JL. They don't do it anywhere near consistently enough to carry you through the bad times. In the good times, it's enough to win you tournaments. In the bad times, you go out in groups. That's been the dichotomy, essentially, of Navi. And yeah, this is a great event to pick them in, though. I can't debate against that. I did say in the first few podcasts I did this year, talking about, what's to come, Navi should be good for about 4 months. I still think they've got a title-winning window for the next 4 months. After that, we'll see. I mean, certain teams seem more likely to figure it out than others. Like FaZe, Vitality, I have credit, will integrate new pieces and get back into title winning form. We'll see about G2. We'll see. They might not be much of a contestant for very long. But Navi for now, yeah. Definitely ready to go. I've credit for Lexi B and Blade for as long as the day is long. They can get it all day. Just the rest of the roster that's a problem.
Honorary shout out to Imma as well, because that guy be mouthing a lot, and
I mean, to be fair, he was the one guy that kept it up when like the others were kind of falling off. Like he was still doing his job in Shanghai. Yeah,
but I think that's probably
or for the major forward, really. Copenhagen.
That's also part of probably what makes him good as like sort of a secondary caller, is that when the system fails, he seems to almost take over. Like, okay, the things we're doing are not right, and we should maybe just do this instead. And maybe he's the only one that I can actually pick up what he himself is putting down, unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean, he was putting up IGL numbers in Copenhagen, so maybe he is secretly just waiting to transition role, but I don't know. That seems ambitious. Yeah, they got off to a weird start though. I must admit, like when I looked at the game against Imperial FE, I was like, you guys did not come in trying to win. Like you just thought you would win, so you didn't think you had to try to win. Like you just showed up.
Yeah, also, to be fair, I did tweet this as well. Imperial FE were playing very off-meta Counter-Strike.
They have to.
Yeah, of course, as you should against one of the best teams in the world. They weren't playing to win fights on the entry. They were playing to guarantee trades every single time. Like the first person wasn't even stopping half the time for it. They just swung and hoped the second guy killed them, or a second girl killed them, and they did very frequently. And sometimes they even got the entry, and it's just life moved on. So
yeah, the Bird from Sky meta. If you ever watched Bird from Sky, his Lingby Vikings roster, there were 3 players on that team who didn't stop. They were just there to die and be traded, and it worked kind of well. So,
yeah.
Not surprised. We should see more underdogs actually trying that when they are clearly outgunned, because it worked pretty well here. dusT, you have an underdog now to pick. You're the first one to take an underdog off the board. Who do you like the look of?
I mean, BB was looking good, but obviously the whole stand-in situation where they had to bring Nafany back and Chiron back, like that pretty much killed that whole dream for me. So that's kind of where I'm at with that. I think I'm choosing between Pain and Eternal Fire. I think are probably the 2 best picks in this slot. I'm trying to think where I want to go because
while you mull that over, just for the viewers at home, BetBoom, there is an article in HLTV about BetBoom unfortunately struggling to source visas for both Boomich and Zorte. That's why they're having to field back members on the bench. So just so everybody's clued into context.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough one because like Pain, I feel like hasn't really had like a whole lot of like quality wins against big teams on LAN, even though they look really good. But then Eternal Fire also only had like one like brief spark moment in 2024. They looked really good and then they kind of fell off again. So I feel like both of them have like really strong weaknesses. But like if I'm just gonna take one, I'll take Pain. I'll just take Pain. Like, and really what I'm doing this off of is just kind of based on like the potential that I see going forward. I feel like this team has always made moves that make them better. Like I feel like they've been on just like a really good trajectory of like making the right moves at the right time. I do think that Big Uzera is a good IGL and one of the best fragging IGLs in the world. I do think that NQZ is finally like another opping prospect out of Brazil, and we haven't really seen one of those for a long time. I feel like Snow keeps evolving as a player. He went from being kind of a passive, timid extremity player into someone who has a lot more confidence now and still very young, so has a whole lot of room to grow. And I do think that Davideus comes in as a great aggressive rifler to really kind of balance out this team, because, Big Air can kind of flip between being an aggressive lurker or being a guy who will go in first to sit up his stars. And then you have, Snow and Cowes, who are kind of like flex riflers, not truly aggressive ones. But like Davideus gives them like a legitimate like entry threat and a legitimate aggressive rifler, and they look good so far throughout the qualification process of this event. They beat Gamer Legion, which is a team that can always be kind of crafty and tough to deal with, and then they were able to beat FaZe. The maps were close, sure, and obviously FaZe is dealing with like a much bigger change than Pain is as far as like the roles that they're having to adapt and all that jazz. But all in all, I've just always been like a team that really likes the way Pain plays and likes the direction they've been in. And I think like for an underdog, they're a pretty solid pick as far as, just kind of knowing the core of the team and what they were able to do last year and kind of seeing the changes that they have made going into this year.
Yeah, Pain is not a team I admittedly study too hard. They are mostly lost in the American weeds for me. A bit distant, but I've been able to catch a couple of the maps here at this event, and you know what? Every time I see Big Zero on a server, and I have the pleasure of actually watching him play, I'm like, yeah, that's a leader for me. Like, that's the kind of IGL I can really get behind. The kind of IGL that I think is coming more and more into meta right now with the way CS2 is played and the way the game is shorter, more coach influence. Less. We don't need as many tacticians who die for everyone. We do need more, leaders of men who go frag and just set the tone. And that's what Big Uzira is. The way he took over, was it on Inferno? Or is it in the opening round on, I want to say, show me the maps. Nuke. It was Nuke against GL. To close out that series, they needed a big performance, a big fragging performance, and they got it out of their IGL. That's the sort of thing that really inspires hope for me in Pain, that they have a long-term vision and ambition, and it's basically just because their leader at the front of it is so impactful and so decisive. So, yeah, I love them as an underdog just for that. Overall, the roster, I think Davideus has come in and, well, he's shown why they removed Lux. Like, I remember at the time when Lux was removed, there were question marks everywhere. And then the addition of Davideus follows, and still, people very lost. But I remember Davideus from prior to this, way back when we're talking about him as a young player, like 19, 20. And he's just got this fragging ceiling. You're just not sure who's going to be able to unlock it. And no one really did. He played on a variety of different projects. It never really seemed to work. So far, 2 series deep with Pain, he's putting out some amazing numbers. I think they've got a lot to be hopeful for in this coming year. This could be their year to truly break through, to stop being just like that fringe team who can qualify from the Americas and occasionally upset someone. This could be the time that they actually take those big scalps. They've already taken down FaZe. New look FaZe, but still, it's FaZe nonetheless. I think this is a great pick. Like, honestly, between them and Eternal Fire, I think those are the 2 most tasty, as you said. You can make a good case for both. I think Pain, it's a lot off the back of the firepower of those riflers coming through.
Yeah, the weird thing about the whole Lux for Davideus move was that David's not really played an entry role properly in the past couple of years. When he was with the Red Canids, he was basically just on Nithon guarding duty to make sure that Nithon didn't feed randomly in the round. Like, you would watch them on T sides, and he was just sitting there hand in hand, making sure that if Nithon died, Davideus traded while holding extremities. I think that's why people were a little confused. But yeah, this guy's a super explosive, sort of fast-paced rifler. Hell, even on 9Z, he was still sort of like third in, as very frequently, Max or DGT would very often sort of lead that charge. So it's not a role that he's, I guess, played a lot of, but he seems to be slotting in really well in this squad. So I'm kind of happy that he's gotten the respect to be able to do something like that, while also, I guess, creating more opportunities for Snow. Because I think, as much as I agree with you, dusT, the fact that Pain have, I guess, made roster moves that have consistently improved them, Snow was a bit of a flat pickup for me. I expected way more out of him from his anchor positions. I expected way more from him in terms of extremity aggressive plays, and it just never sparked. It was basically always Lux, and still Lux did look like a bit of a headless chicken at times, because they were kind of desperate for a move outside of what Big Uzera could offer. So I like the addition of Davideus. It leaves some of that strain on Big Uzera. There's another person that can open up a side of the map and just control it by himself almost. And yeah, I mean, I don't really have too much to say about the rest of the squad. NQZ is okay. I'm fine with NQZ. I'm fine with Kawez. Kawez is kind of the unsung hero on this roster. I think I think in the move for Davideus, he's probably had to shift some of his roles around, which is a little unfortunate, but he's a man who can hold his own when he's given enough time to adapt to his positions. So yeah, I'm actually annoyed you picked Pain, because if they were still afloat, I probably would have snapped him up myself.
Yeah, I mean, I think the tough thing is just you have to understand that Snow and Kawis is also in the exact same boat. Like, they had 0 LAN experience before they joined Pain, so it's just they had to take a pretty huge leap up in what they were doing and then what they were doing for Pain. And Kawis was a similar story. Like, he had only played in some academy league before he joined Pain, and it took him a little while to get going on LAN. And I feel like if you compare like Snow's first events on land with Pain to like the last, let's say, 6 or 7 he's played, like he's shown progressive growth. And so like that's what I'm looking at more than just like surface results. I'm looking at like, am I seeing growth? Am I seeing progress? Am I seeing the right moves being made at the right time? And I just feel like I have a hard time finding a move that Pain has done that has backfired. You know, eventually it has paved a way forward that has made them better. And it's been kind of cool to see their evolution as a team. Like like don't get me wrong, like in a dream world, you know, I probably would have liked to have seen them gotten someone else, but like I do think Davideus is still like a pretty damn good pickup. So yeah, I like him a lot.
I will say, as for my Brazilian enthusiasts, Nizen was in the position that Snow is on a lot of maps. They only used him for a short period of time. They pulled him from the academy, and Nizen was as good as Snow was 6 months into Snow's entry to Pain. So, you know, for anyone watching out there, if you need an anchor player, Nizen's actually a pretty good, you know, young player to pick up. By the way, just as
Yeah.
an aside, you know,
It's-
Snow has grown. I'm with you.
Yeah. It's a bit of a tangent there, but it's all right. We don't mind shouting out younger players. I do have for me, Pain. It's just it feels so similar to Mongols in certain ways, like a longer time period over which it's been built behind a fragging rifler of an IGL, and they've just developed pieces here and there. I mean, now Davideus kind of strays from the sort of same idea because he's not just some kid, but it's a fun little parallel to have between the two. And I think it's going to keep on. If it keeps on succeeding, we're going to see more people try it. Like if you have a good IGL who's a rifler, just bring in some random fraggers.
That's actually a good reminder as well, because, like you said, Davides is not a new guy on the block. It probably helps, you know. I think if you think about the stages that Pain were playing at and the aspirations of the players, being surrounded by young guys, if they're all losing their minds, one guy yelling at you can sometimes inspire some of you, but if there's more leaders in the camp, that can only serve to benefit what is a core of young guys, I think.
Yeah, I should think so. Just generally keeping the morale high, the belief strong. That'll be important for the younger players. Now I've left myself. I'm torn between talking about the team I want to talk about, but who I know are not playing with their full roster, and picking the one that's probably going to get me points. Yeah, I'm going to take
Sure.
Eternal Fire. I'm going to go for the points. Not going to lie. I'm going to keep it cynical today. Another day I may have picked Heroic, but that is not this day. Eternal Fire are in a spot where I'm slightly lost. Not lost. What's the best way to express this? I'm not entirely sure how I feel about the addition of Jota and the fact they're still winning without him really doing a damn thing. Because it felt like, you know, Jota for Calyx was meant to be, we're adding another prong, another facet to the way we play. He's going to be able to chime in when other things don't work. He's very aggressive on his lurks sometimes. When he's anchoring, he's willing to play make. You know, if things with the Lucadia and Zantares, you know, the focal point don't work, we've got this flank attack. Essentially was how I felt about it. So far, he's been barely active. Like very little like focus or activation. I mean, Major wins them their first map of the first series, I believe, or the first series in its entirety against Art's new team. And then the second series is just classic Zantares, Lucadia banging, just going toe to toe with some of the best riflers in the world, and honestly just completely shutting down Nico, which was something to watch. But no Jota involvement. So that side of it, I'm a little miffed. But at the end of the day, dub's a dub, win's a win. And, you know, the fact that they have Zantares, a player who, if not for the teams he's played on, probably would go down as one of the greatest, very greatest riflers we've ever seen in Counter-Strike. But due to, you know, geography, essentially ends up being a cool story that you actually have to know the scene to know. I think they're in a good spot here. They're still sort of underdogs. They're still hard to reckon with. And you know you're going to have a very combative team up against you on the server when you play them. And there's no guarantee, unless you're Spirit, that you'll have the best rifler on the server. Hell, even only a couple teams can straight up argue they'll have the best player on the server when Zantares is on and how impactful he is. So I think Eternal Fire are always going to be a solid underdog pick as long as he remains Zantares. So long may his prime continue. And yeah, this is the other fine underdog. I think these are the two underdogs already off the board now that everyone wanted. Yumi, you're going to have fun in a second.
Yeah. I mean, Eternal Fire for me is in a weird spot because like they did show a lot of potential, right? I mean, they came top 8 the first major of the year, but then they kind of went on a downward trajectory, in my opinion, after that. They didn't really follow it up nicely. But
Yeah.
then they had like that BetBoom event that they wound up coming second place in to Spirit after beating like Mouse Sports and Heroic and some pretty good teams in EPL. Obviously, they lost to Navi in a grinding best of 5 that won all 5 maps, and they beat some good teams to get to that final. But then after that, it's just like the Challengers Katowice event where they lost to Bait, like, and didn't even make it out of
Yeah,
groups. And
that
then
one was rough.
obviously it's like the EU RMR was very damning because like losing to 3D Max in the best of 1 I can forgive, but then losing to Sashi and then losing to a Strauss where they didn't even have device and they were having to use Bro as a stand-in and like all this other stuff, like that's kind of like unforgivable in my opinion that they didn't make it to the opening stage of the major. So they really did like finish off the year in kind of a tough way. But yes, if I'm looking at the roster on paper, like yes, Xantares is still outside of Donk, probably one of the best entry riflers that you can get in the world right now. It's like him and Elige are probably like kind of neck and neck in my opinion after Donk. And then Voxic did show a very good second half of the year compared to the first half of the year as kind of becoming a secondary star of this team. And look, while I think Calix was fine, I don't think he was necessarily like a burden. I do think Jada represents like an opportunity to bring in another playmaker that could be another star for this team on a Sound Gall squad that was dominating online, and he was clearly one of their best players next to xFloud for the majority of last year. Obviously, when they got to LAN, things didn't go as well, but he was kind of the one guy on
Yeah.
Sangol that kind of kept up their individual form in Shanghai. So, yes, these first few games with Eternal Fire online have not been like him getting off the blocks, right away, but I do think he still represents an opportunity long term if they figure everything out to like be a true third, like strong fragger next to Voxic and Xantares and like give them something that they can count on going forward. So, it's one of those things where like I could see them grow from this move, or I could see them just kind of stagnate out and like yeah they'll be a top 10, top 8 team in the world, but maybe never get past that. It really just depends on how they evolve and mesh going forward, and kind of how some of these other rosters play out alongside them.
See, I would probably be with you if I hadn't seen what I've seen already from Eternal Fire. Like, don't get me wrong, Xantares, lovely. Woxic, it's hit and miss maybe sometimes. Wicadia, also maybe a little hit and miss, but I'd say on the more consistent end versus Woxic. I I think Calix is going underappreciated here because him and Madger were kind of the only two that were throwing support to the star in Xantares and sometimes to set up Wicadia. And unless there are going to be concessions made by either Wicadia, Woxic, or you're not having Xantares throw flashes for you. Um, but between those two players, I actually think Jota will struggle very immensely here because he's actually not been in teams where he's had to be a supportive piece. He's always been utilized as a sort of front running entry or aggressive player, and that's part of the reason I think he actually still maintained form going into Shanghai versus some of the other players is that he is set up to be that guy. And so now he's being put into Calix's positions, and I'm sure that's subject to change as they progress, but he's been put into basically Calix's positions, and he's not involved because I don't think they know how to involve him. I don't think Calix was sat there with him in like a redundancy move being like, oh yeah, the new apprentices, I'm going to train them up so that they can replace my job. So I think there's a lot of unwritten things that the Calix was doing for this Eternal Fire squad that is actually going to, I think, serve to suffer for them. I think the advantage for them in this stage, though, is that if it works like the previous stage, the underdog teams or the bounty hunters, the highest seed bounty hunter picks first, as far as I'm aware. So I think they'll have the pick of the litter as to which team they play in the next stage of the tournament, which is, I think, the best way that I guess they progress. So that's about the only real positives I can stem from this, aside from Xantares somehow hitting a new peak in his career so late into it.
Yeah, the Jota side of it's going to be interesting because speaking to Jumpy when they were still on Sangel, all these players, Jota essentially doesn't. It's not so much that he gets explicitly set up by the game plan; it's that he has the freedom to call his own shot. and to call his own number, and typically someone like Linus, like Youngster, just makes the move to go set him up, allows the play to happen, rather than explicitly they come into the game with the plan of him going and doing something. So that's I think going to be the dynamic he needs to work himself back into, is to figure out a way to still be vocal on a team full of veterans and players who already are stars and already have things set up for them, to try and get the little details he's trying to put in, because he is very aggressive but still in the extremities. That's always been the sort of the little the catch, essentially, is that even though you'll see his opening numbers high, you're like, where the hell's he doing it? And you just watch him flash through a smoke on a random edge of a map that you don't expect. Like, that's usually been the Joe to play. So maybe if they can start bringing that into the playbook, maybe they can start leaving the voids or spaces in rounds where he can make that happen. I think that'll be interesting. And potentially, honestly, if I had to take away from anyone, it's like, yo, Woxic, get the flashbangs, double flashbang. You're a double flashbang guy. Like, that's now your job. That's where I'd make it happen, because the rifles.
I mean, to be fair, that's what a lot of oppers do in the early round anyway on T sides. If you look at some of the other teams out there, like, that's usually how those players are utilized. Like, there's really only a few exceptions of like people that aren't. Like, when you obviously have like really aggressive oppers, like for example, like a Ziwu or an Ultimate, or what Jumbo is doing for Passion UA. Like, you do have some of those oppers who are at times even hybrid riflers who can help you entry. But, the more standard oppers, that is kind of their job, is to kind of set up other people in those early round situations on the T side. So I think that's a good call on your part to kind of mention that it's probably going to be the other guy next to Major to be more of a supportive element in some of these more like early round situations on the T side.
Yeah. Yumi, final pick. Who do you want? Visa issues or double visa issues?
Yeah. It's like, wait, they're both the same thing.
Yeah.
God, I actually do wish Heroic didn't have visa issues. And
which ones gonna maybe be missing?
From Heroic, it's Sneer who's missing. Madden's playing.
Yeah. Oh, that's right. Yeah, thanks.
So it's Nilo that's missing, and then Tanir that's missing as a replacement for Nilo. So now we've gone down the rungs, and we have Madden now, and I guess plus synergy with some pious. That's about all I've got. Listen, I think we were both very high on Sangal towards the end of the year. I think there was a lot.
Picking Heroic? I just need to check.
I am picking Heroic. I'm picking Heroic. Sorry.
It was
Make that very clear. Because it's one visa issue versus two. I'm more comfortable with that way around. Yeah, I think towards the end of the year we were definitely very high on Sangal, and we had maybe high expectations for them versus all the online results that they were having. I guess the style of play was quite exciting as well. And there was, I think there was a lot of complacency or like capitulation. They of course were playing with an AWPer that was just not very good. And some pious is a direct upgrade to that. And to be honest, as much as I'm maybe not so convinced by the fact that Madden's having to stand in at the last minute here for Heroic, Madden's also been a fairly autonomous player to me, where I don't think he needs a lot of micromanagement. He will be told to play in spots, and he will play them fine, unless the game plan is suddenly thrust against the wall, like it was so many times on Falcons or Ents, where he does start to, I guess, command a bit more presence himself. Like, he will move into like a playmaking mode, and it doesn't always look great, but he's trying. I think the important thing is that he tries. And in a weird way, it will, I think, benefit this team having that more veteran, some pious Madden combo where they're more familiar with each other, where if the core is struggling to find something that works, then they have an alternate that they can move to, where they can sort of make use of the duo that was. So I want to believe that Linus can still and Soul can call a good game here, but I don't think that they're going to have their first choice. I mean, they haven't so far through this tournament, and for them that makes it more difficult to make these picks work when you have the 1 day buffer to prepare, as well as what the 2 days practice may be at max with Madden.
Yeah, that's not ideal. I mean, look, for me, this Heroic signing I thought it was pretty awesome. Like, the way they rebuilt from absolute nothing with a core of, young, but in my eyes, quite promising players. dusT, what was your read on that? When you saw they picked up the Sangal core, the additions, initially, we're just going to get your talk about Nilo first and some Pius. Obviously, we've ended up in a very different situation at the end, but that initial 5, rumored, eventually not quite announced. What was your take on them before we found out we might have some problems?
I don't know, man, because like I feel like going into Shanghai, even though they were definitely very different teams, I felt like Passion UA and Sangal were in a similar spot where they were both so successful online, and particularly in past UAs, they played so many games, dude. Like they played so many matches. Like they were just so battle hardened by like how many officials they played. And Sangal are winning everything online. Like I think what they won 2 seasons of challengers in a row, didn't they, for Europe, if I'm not
Yeah, I
mistaken?
think that's right.
Yeah.
And then they were also doing well elsewhere, and so they look like it's like sure. Like I know we always discuss, yeah, but can you do it on land? But it's just like sometimes teams are so successful online that you almost feel like they're a little bit undeniable. It's just like surely that they're playing this well, this consistently, like it should transition. But the issue for me is like obviously Shanghai didn't go well for them. You could kind of forgive like maybe the best of one losses to Mouse and Cloud9, but the fact that they lost to Eclot and is like ridiculous that happened. That there's just no way that should be happening. And I think the other issue is that xCloud was like this star aggressive player for the team, and he did not show up at all in Shanghai. Like I said, only really Joda did for them in that event. I actually was one of the ones that had egg on my face on the analyst desk because I picked them to go through and then they wound up bombing out pretty much. So like that was a tough one for me after watching them and being impressed to see what actually developed from that. And then even on this team, xCloud still isn't looking at the level that I want him to be at in the games they have played so far in this qualifier, which kind of scares me a little bit. And then obviously you have the whole situation where Tanir was one of their better players, in my opinion, throughout what we've seen for them so far in these opening games. And not having him, I think, is going to be a huge hit. So, yeah, I mean, here's the thing. Like, if I'm going back to your original question, I felt it was one of those moves that like Heroic kind of had to do just to keep themselves in contention to get invited to tournaments. Like it's basically, once you lost your core to Falcons and Falcons basically took your slot in the rankings, you had to kind of do something to keep yourself relevant. Otherwise, you're doing something like NIP where you're just trying to like get the best pieces possible and hope that you can like play your way into a wild card slot or something like that. So in a like practical sense, I get why they did this. Like it put them in the best position possible rankings wise. But as far as like just looking at the long term future of this team, I just don't know if they are going to have enough consistent firepower to be able to push like far, if that makes any sense. Like, yeah, some Pies is a great opper. Like, yeah, I think I respect, the brain trust of this team between Saw as a coach and Linus as an IGL, but I just don't know if, unless X-File can finally kick it on and they kind of settle out like their fifth situation, I'm not really sure what this team's capable of.
Yeah, the xCloud problem is starting to get a bit worrisome for me too. Even though I've watched way too much of this team. Like they've been one of my, little pet favorites in 2024, and they still are now. I've watched pretty much every map they've played now with this new roster. And essentially what we've had so far has been a highlighting of essentially how good Linus is as a fragging IGL, because he can go find frags, go bang heads when he needs to. How surprisingly high in firepower Youngster is, because if you don't know, like historically, Youngster, whilst averaging support numbers a lot of the time, or closer to support numbers, like 1.04 sort of ratings, he could just top the charts on a map when things are not quite going right. You need a recovery miracle in an anchor situation. xCloud's dead. Jota tried something, died. You need a surprise triple kill. Youngster was surprisingly effective at that. And especially on a team that didn't have an AWPer who could really do it with any consistency back when they had Sammy. It was a very important part of their playstyle, of their sort of win conditions. Now you add to the fact that they have that guy, they have Sun Pius, who looks to be maybe not in his best form ever, but he actually looks with it on the pace. That sort of gap he's had since last playing for Falcons has only served to reinvigorate him. He's found a much richer vein of form. I think they still have a lot of solutions that are just slightly overlooked when you think about traditionally who should be carrying you. You think it should be xCloud. It should be that Tanir Nilo role. Now it's going to be Madden, so we can't really look to it. We're going to be relying on Linus, going to be relying on Youngster. Those two are surprisingly effective, and with some Pies looking the way he is, I do think this makes them just easily clear BetBoom in terms of the underdog picks here. Like, BetBoom, bringing back Nafany and Chiron, the roles go back to shit. The calling goes down the gutter. They have their caller, they have their surprising fraggers. They also have honestly, leading the squad right now is Sumpires, a very strong AWPer. I think they're a good team, and the brain trust may just be enough because, man, they called out how they were going to beat Liquid at halftime on Ancient, then went and did it, and that takes some doing. So, no, I have a lot of faith in Linus, especially, and Heroic. Yeah, they probably won't actually go win this event, but they are going to be a real team, I think, in the coming months. Even if it is Tanir, hell, we may not even see Nilo back until June or next year, Lord knows. But I think Tanir's a fragger, and Heroic got a lot of potential.
I think it is interesting because Youngster, like you said, kind of support numbers. But if the game is going to shit, he is actually pretty good, especially in like mid to late rounds, at closing scenarios or finding ways back in. I think my biggest critique of Youngster used to be that in Afterplans, he would almost play too safe. Like he was fighting every fiber in his being to take a swing on an advantageous timing, or when he feels like an intuition on when CTs are re-entering bomb sites, for example, he would almost like fight that feeling. And I guess as this team, or he has developed, I'm seeing him take that risk a little bit more. He's willing to take that fight and push the 3v3 into a 3v2 for that moment. So I think he's just getting a little bit more confidence under his belt, because I don't think he was, I guess, expecting to be in as many weird late round scenarios as they end up being in, because maybe those scrims just go so good. But as they've played more officials, I think he's come into his own in that kind of role as well.
Maybe XCloud is the scrim god.
Yeah, I mean, going back to XCloud really quickly, like the interesting thing is that his T side numbers are actually pretty good. Like he goes for obviously LNZ, is kind of like an entry IGL type figure who is very successful at it. But their next more aggressive rifler is XCloud. He takes kind of the second most opening attempts on the T side, and his success rate is actually pretty high. And like his T side rating, throughout this qualifier is actually pretty high. It's just for whatever reason the CT side he's not translating, even though he's playing like a lot of the star roles, like he's playing ACON on Mirage, for example, or he kind of mixes between playing rotator and anchor roles, like he's an A anchor on Anubis, for example. So it's like, it's just his CT side has been definitely his weaker side. So if you can just get that up to snuff and just kind of balance out his game a little bit, like he still has potential to be a star. Like again, like XCloud and Jodo were like the two players in that Sangal squad that you felt like were the ones that had the potential to really rise up and be kind of like that next generation of star players. And it just felt like Joda kind of surpassed him a little bit there at the end. But I'm not giving up on XCloud yet. Like I still see potential there. It's just about rounding out the rest of his game. And I think if he can do that, then this team definitely, can be a strong one going forward. And I think it was probably like best case scenario of what Heroic could do after their team got raided by Falcons, right? I mean, there was really not a whole lot more you could do outside of this, in my opinion. So we'll just have to see how it plays out.
Yeah, they did all this and save some money, because if you compare buyouts, they've made quite a
they
profit.
Certainly profited off of this situation. Yeah, 100%.
And they were just like, yeah, you know what, Nilo? 3-year deal straight off the bat. they were willing to splash that out. Yeah, of course they do.
They got an IGL who probably, honestly, you could make a case for him being one of the 10 to 12 best right now, just in terms of fragging value, calling value, his age. He's 22 or 23. They've got time. They're in no rush. Nilo, do whatever you need to do. They'll be waiting. That brings us to the extra section, the overtime. We've got two teams left lying here, BetBoom and G2. I'm going to start with the bigger name. dusT,
Go on.
You didn't take him. What are your thoughts on G2 right now?
I mean, I've had this same feeling about G2 for a very long time, and nothing is really different with this roster change. It's that G2 has the talent. They simultaneously can win everything, but then they can also lose out of nowhere to teams they have no business losing. And so really, like when you look at when Malbs joined the team and Stacks comes on as the IGL, yeah, they won a couple of titles, but then they also had that whole situation where they went out dead last at IEM Rio. And so it's just like you could see the good and the bad. And even in Shanghai, the fact that what was it? They're in the European RMR. They had to go into overtime against 9 Pandas, and then they lost to 3D Max. It's like, what are we doing here, guys? Like, you're a top 5 team in the world. You should be able to take care of these teams, no problem. But then look, like they course corrected. They got their revenge against 3D Max. They beat FaZe to make it to the playoffs. They had that win over Heroic, who was a very dangerous team coming into the playoffs. And so I've seen the highs and lows of this team is kind of my point. Like I see where the ceiling is, and like when everything's going correctly, everything's firing on all cylinders, like they really are a team that could be a world beater. But then, it's like once they get stuck in a game, they really struggle to adjust to get themselves back into it. And so what I mean by that is like when I watch their shot calling, they had the potential to play a well-balanced game of Counter-Strike and be very explosive, but also be able to play standard and do what they need to do to be successful. But then in certain games and matches that you watch, it's like if they run against some adversity, they just struggle to adjust. They'll just kind of keep running the same things over and over again. So like the example would be obviously be here is that whole Ancient match where they just kept running, mouths into a brick wall at middle. And it's just like, guys, like where's the adjustment? Where's the next page in the playbook? Like where is some level of digging yourself out of a hole and trying something different or being more dynamic? It's like I've seen that they can do it, but then I see them get stuck in some of these games where they don't ever. They're stubborn. And when you have the talent that they have, I mean, in theory, yes, you can just trebuchet like, Malbs and Heavy God and Munacy into an area, and they probably will win the vast majority of the time. But it's like trying to brute force your way through struggles is not really what I want to see. And I'm just gonna be honest, like their in-game leading is so much more behind anyone else in the top 5 and even top 10, and I could even probably go further down than that. Like there are so many IGLs I'd pick over Snacks. Like it's absurd. And like now I'm just also scared because I do think Nico is a very strong second voice on this team. So not only did you lose a little bit in fragging, I mean, yeah, Malvs and Heavy got to kind of make up for it like as a duo, but you're still losing some fragging consistency there. Because I mean, Nico was probably the best rifle in the world after Donk this first year of CS2. So you're already losing on that front, but then you are losing a strong second voice that could help, them in mid-round situations or help them in a timeout or something along those lines. And now they don't have that anymore. It sounds like it's Hunter's trying to be doing that from like some of the comments we heard from the qualifier, but I just don't have faith in it, right? Like here's the thing. Like if Mouse and Munacy are on their top game, yes, they just have enough firepower to really break through anyone. But if those or one of them's having a slightly off game or their team's like playing very well, like this team could struggle. So I just don't have any faith in like their long-term strategy, like as far as just how they approach the game. Like I don't believe in Stacks as an IGL at all, like zero.
I think in the post game after they lost to Eternal Fire, just as they've been eliminated, Snacks actually was very forthcoming about the, some of the awkward moments that G2 had in this qualifier so far. Part of the void of Nico was definitely something that he confirmed. And I think even if you detached the mid round calling of Nico, like you have to also realize of him as the symbolic figure on the roster with not only his relation to Hunter, but then also his very close relation to Monacy as well, given his betting into the roster. So I think there is going to be an adaptation period. I think as well, based on the way that Snacks was framing some of his answers, he's kind of talking about how like other people were mid-rounding. I think Monacy looked very vocal, Hunter looked very vocal. People are trying to fill the void. But not everyone is taking to that the same way. I think they were saying at the start when they were playing, God, who'd they play first?
Bait.
Bait.
They played Bait, yeah. Like Snacks was saying, he didn't even know that Malbs was just going to run out middle by himself, without support so many rounds in a row. Because I think even after that Ancient that they played and lost to Bait, Malbs was having a great game, but he was also just doing his own thing, and he wasn't really communicating that, I guess, is how it was, I guess, put by Snacks at the time. So, there's new burdens of responsibility on Malbs to be a star player, but star players are not mute as well. You might have an intuition, you might have a thing you want to do, but that's where you call for people to do that. But then also there's going to be an atmosphere shift for Hunter and Monacy, and I do agree. I think G2 right now are going to look a little weak, and if there is going to be someone up on the chopping block, it is either Snacks or Hunter, because I think that is my problem with this team right now, is that very frequently Snacks and Hunter are kind of coupled together. They're letting Malbs do his thing, kind of commanding space in the middle of the map. You're allowing Heavy God to anchor one side of the bomb site or one side of the map as well, and then Monacy can float. So very frequently, Snacks and Hunter are together, and they are the two weakest players on this team. So that's maybe the sore spot for me. And yeah, the calling left something to be desired. That much I will say. Sorry. Sorry. G2 beat Big also. That's
They
an
did,
amendment. Yeah, I said that they lost in the last round against Eternal Fire, and that's just wrong. But yeah, they beat Big, very, very close game. So yeah, I think there's something left. Even if it's not snacks, man, like I want to know what Taz contributes. I would love to know, because even if I genuinely believe Blade or Ash, I don't care what who the in-game leader is on that team as much as I care about who the coach is. You know, I think there is a power dynamic where it can be sort of 50-50, even maybe like 60-40, but some teams you see the success of a coach where I think they almost have like 90-10 influence or 80-20 kind of influence on the game. So if it's not snacks, then one of those old polls got to go.
Yeah, I see why you lean towards that, and I honestly can't disagree. Like when I theorized, moves when Nico was definitely going to be leaving, I was thinking about gutting the entire project. Like I was going to be honest, I was going to leave myself with Malbs, m0NESY, and then just build from there. See what I can build.
Well, you need one more.
Then I remember how VRS works. I'm like, damn, I'm stuck with one of them. Trying out that. But yeah, no, they certainly do feel like the clear weak points, and aside from the occasional like dusT, B-site hold, you don't really call Hunter's name very often, do you? You're not saying that's the guy who's going to save my round, who's going to win something. And as far as the calling goes, it seems if anyone is making calls, they aren't doing anything, so I can't even give them a hero call bonus. Like there is a clear weakness in this side when it comes to the strategy. I think they are desperately wanting for a quality IGL, and that's why even after 2 trophies they won, I think, with Snacks after signing him, because they won one before when HooXi was away, and Stewie filled in last
Dallas,
year. In Dallas, yes. Even though they have won 2 titles, for me they were not significant titles. Plus, I think you could have done that with almost any old person calling over what they got out of Snacks. And honestly, a lot of other IGLs or more natural IGLs would have been honestly more involved in the creation of opportunities for others. One of the other problems I have with him is he's so often not just dying for the team. Like on a hard entry path, I far too often see a pack with 3 players not named Snacks, and then him stumbling in late trying to make a clutch happen when he's just not the player I want here.
Yeah, he weirdly alternates between being willing to sack himself for his stars and then lurking by himself while the rest of it's a very weird thing where it kind of pivots back and forth, and some of that may be just based on timing and opportunity and when people are on the map and they decide to make a mid-round call. But you're right. Here's the thing. Just do the thought experiment. Go to the HLTV rankings and work your way down the list and tell me an IGL you think Snacks is better than. You're gonna have a hard time doing it. Yeah. So I just feel like that eventually is going to have to be solved. If G2 wants to be better, and not just be capped out at relying on raw talent, they're going to have to make that move. And look, I think Hunter was fine as a quote unquote 4th best player on your team when you had the combination of Nico, Malbs, and m0NESY. That is just enough of an engine to drive you through a lot. But, yes, Malbs and Heavy God are very strong, and m0NESY is still the best opera in the world, but it is going to require a little bit more out of Hunter, not only from a fragging perspective, but also from probably a helping lead the team perspective. He is, again, the longest standing member of the organization at this point. He is one of the, outside of Snacks, more veteran players on the team, as far as how long he's been around and things of that nature. So he probably has to kind of fill that void of the second voice. Again, yeah, I'm sure hopefully m0NESY would communicate the shots he wants to go for, and hopefully Malbs will get better at, facilitating himself in the sense of hey, I want to go do this, at least making his team aware of it, and trying to get some more support to make those things happen. So there's definitely going to be a learning curve when it comes to just how they manage their mid rounds, but I just do think at some point they're going to have to make that IGL move. That's just where I'm at. I'm kind of over the Snacks thing already. Been over it, really.
Yeah, I mean, I was over it from day one. The title of the video was G2 got it wrong. Took a lot of flack from G2 fans, but it was just a true statement.
It's just a stupid thing where, sorry, I have to do this. It's just a stupid thing where it's dumb, morons out there in the world will just look at the movie oh, but look, G2 gets rid of HooXi and then they win 2 titles. Yeah, you're forgetting the other part of that roster moves where they got Malbs for Nexa. Did you forget about that part? That's the bigger part of that move, by the way. But that's the one that had the most impact.
But did you also forget about how bad the T sides look by HooXi as well? At so many different events. Even if you don't have the best players, if you're saying that HooXi can actually skill, this is where I have a problem with it. If you're going to say Hooksy skill gap snacks so significantly, then why didn't they win more when they were on their slump? Why didn't they get into more successful round winning positions? They looked just as bad with worse pieces, but they looked just as bad as they do with snacks. I think, like, as much as I
don't think that's quite true. I don't have them quite that bad, and they do have, like, as much as Richard Lewis has started not a campaign of trying to smear the Hooksy titles, but like I've heard him on several occasions now talk about how, you know, there's always caveats. I was at the start of season, end of a season. Oh, these rosters, this roster. That man won multiple prestige events in the same year with that roster. He achieved great things. Not just fine things, great things. I do think he does get overlooked a lot. And whilst at the end, I guess you can agree with some of the analysis of how his entry pathing wasn't up to snuff. Some of the T-side calls looked like they were going to shit. His T-side calls were stunning when he wasn't on a team with ego. When he has got full control, and that's, I think, a big issue that Hooksy has, is that his mental was lost towards the end. But as an actual leader, I don't believe he could be considered weaker tactically. Like, I do believe that he.
Bro, they won IM Dallas without him, and Stewie 2K hasn't played the video game in years. Like, that's not a good look. That's all I'm gonna say.
No, it's not a good look. Optics are terrible. The optics are terrible, and I do admit that he is clearly. I think his box was gone by the end, and the fact that he hasn't committed to a project since, I just don't think he's still recovered from that. But there is no doubt in my mind he's a better IGL tactically overall than Snacks.
Yeah, I know. Sure. I won't disagree with the depth. It's just like when they were in the game, I struggled to see that sometimes, where I think I know that there is capability there. I think, you know, even the Dallas win, there was a lot of credit given to Hooksy, even when they won that event. You know, they said like, oh, Hooksy was staying up and like giving us analysis and, you know, doing all these like anti-strats and blah, 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 like giving them prep documents basically for Dallas so that the Stewie move didn't look as shit. And it could have been just shit and everybody would have just moved past it. But I do think I always wanted somebody to jump in on an analysis role for G2 alongside Snacks. I'd said that from the start. I wanted Ash with him if he was going to make this move. I wanted somebody that could command a bit more, not only preparation, but sort of formation of the troops, like Blade and Ash can do. And I just think it's such a waste, because I don't disagree. You know, I don't think Snacks is the most tactically deep in-game leader, but part of that post-game interview where I tangent, I do that a lot, sorry. Part of that post-game interview was that, you know, people were calling, they were doing these mid-rounds, and some of them were, quite frankly, stupid. And he still said yes. And, you know, he's the final call. He's the captain. He's supposed to veto bad decisions, but he still said yes. And he's like, well, maybe I'm not going to do that. Actually, you know, realizing that there is that void to be filled and everyone's going to be coming up with ideas, he is going to have to take a bigger burden of responsibility now more than ever to show his value as a leader. Maybe not as a tactician, but as a leader on this team, because I think without that, the team can very easily fragment. You know, you have a heavy goal that's just coming in, you know, so used to being alone and just basically carrying his teams. You have a Hunter that's lost a cousin from the squad that doesn't really know his place. A Monacy that, to be honest, didn't look... I mean, he still had good maps so far in this tournament, but he didn't look as on form as you would maybe expect from the best AWPer in the world.
Yeah, he banged out 3D Max and then kind of got out-AWPed by Hyped on map 1 and then didn't do much else. And you're like, that was worrying.
And then you have a Malbs as well that has a new burden of responsibility himself that may not be used to that dynamic. So this is where Snacks has to be a leader of men in the server. He's always held that calm demeanor, and I think that's probably what they needed after Hooksy tilts himself off the face of the earth. But if he can't be a leader of men, then I do agree. We move on. We move past the Snacks entry. You know, he's probably the next on the block if the team seems to sort of internally fragment like it did towards the end with Hooksy as well.
It's also a tough one because, like, you know that you're on the clock. Like Munacy's contract is eventually going to expire, right? And he is eventually going to be potentially seeking greener pastures. And G2's going to have a tough decision to make on whether or not you let his contract run out and he goes on a free somewhere else, or whether or not you get at least some buyout for him with like 6 months left on his contract or something like that. So you're having to think about that in the back of your head, where, like, I'm sure part of G2 is trying to convince Munacy to stay. Like, look, we're trying to build around you. Like, we brought in Heavy God, we got Malbs. Like, you know, we're trying to build town around you and make you want to stay here and be our franchise player. But that is still a problem that they're dealing with on that one front. I do think that to a degree, Malbs is kind of limit testing right now, like seeing like how much can he get away with, like what can he do on his own, when does he need to maybe like fall back just a little bit. And yeah, I think Yumi's right. Like there needs to be another coach on this team besides Taz. Like if Taz wants to be like a GM, like head coach, like leader of men type guy, great. But you need some type of strategical coach on this team or analyst or whatever the case may be to like help build them a better playbook, help build some better mid round protocols, help build in some better like mid game adjustments that they just don't seem to have. Like they just lack depth. Like again, when they're at the top of their game, they have some pretty good ideas on how they want to open rounds and how they want to finish them. But it's just when they get in the murky waters of a mid round, that's where things really seem to kind of like go off the rails. And you just can't be doing that when your other fellow top 5 teams are just so far ahead of you on how they approach the game and how they navigate those situations. Like, yeah, sheer talent's just not always going to get you over the hump in those situations, even though they certainly have plenty of it.
I refuse to believe Heavy God cost as much as the Nico transfer. So, surely you've
Of
got
course,
a bit of extra budget,
Oh, 100%. 100%.
Yeah, connecting the dots from Malbs to Monacy seems to be their T-side dilemma going forward. Not sure they have the players to do that currently. But yeah, raw talent will get them a certain amount. Yeah, he's fucking Heavy God.
Yeah.
Let's be real. He's been like this for a while now, and he's just unfazed by the step up in competition. Realistically, playing 3D Max, not 3D Max, playing Bait then Big is basically his level of competition anyway. But still, glad to see him still fragging. Finally, let's take a brief detour to BetBoom, who, will not be playing with their full roster at these LAN finals, or these finals. dusT, before they got screwed by their visas, we saw probably the best looking BetBoom ever, because we've never seen a BetBoom roster beyond the NAFI version last year. How high were your hopes seeing Axile like return to form like that? Did you see it continuing, or was this more of a nice little honeymoon blip?
I mean, I saw it last year. Axile's second half of 2024 was way better than the first half. Like, he definitely picked up individual form when he was on that Cloud9 lineup, so, like, I don't think that this is, like, some anomaly or something like that. I think he's been building himself back up for a while. I think when you look at it from the BetBoom perspective, they certainly upgraded. They got a better IGL with Boomich than Nafany, 100%. And then I do think Axile is a better player than Chiron. So, like, from their perspective, they win big. Now, from the Boomich Axile perspective, like, it's tough because you lost out on some very talented players, right? I mean, losing Heavy God, losing Icy, and then, that's no knock against Zorte or anything like that, but it's just like Icy scene that has so much upside, and then obviously Heavy God is just a little bit better than someone like Siren or something along those lines, or even Chiron. So it's a weird one for me, but the thing is like the overall BetBoom team and like what they were able to accomplish, beating Mouse Sports, beating Furia, and just watching them play, like watching the film, yeah, they look hella good. Like again, I think they are a more dynamic team now. They're capable of being more explosive, but still playing standard with need be. I think Boomich is great for being willing to sacrifice himself. I think they've moved MagnaJez into even more star roles since Boomich joined the team. Axile has no problem kind of, maybe giving up some of his spots to give MagnaJez his spots to succeed, but Axile is still fragging very well as like a more quote unquote aggressive extremity player that can also just be a trade fragger and executes. Like, I felt like this team actually pretty quickly hit the ground running as far as finding balance on how they manage the roles and just how they wanted to approach the game. So yeah, I think before this whole situation happened where now they have to bring Nafany and Chiron back, that is a tough one because now they don't even have a primary opera. Her MagnaJez is going to have to do it or something weird like that. So they're definitely in a tough spot at LAN because of this whole Vita situation. But prior to that, yeah, I think the upside for this team is actually quite nice. Like, I do think they have a pretty good composition of players.
Yeah, I think I remember saying I was surprised BetBoom hadn't tried to kill each other because I just thought they had too many voices on the team. I think that's where the roster moves are beneficial because I think Boomich is the strong. It will be the strongest voice on this team. I mean Magno I think can be vocal. Zorte always kind of a bit of a quiet kid, and Siren and Axile will not give trouble to a call. So I think there's a very clear hierarchy where it's going to be probably Boomich and Magno doing a lot of the talking in mid rounds and commanding what the next play is. Where before, I think you had Nafany, Chiron, and Magno that are all yappers. They're all yappers. So I think the chemistry is going to be better. But I think the important point is definitely still Exile. Like, this guy looks confident again. I think there was a period where, I don't think he's actually changed a lot about the way that he will play his positions on this BetBoom team, but he just looks more willing to take a fight, where I see him slink back so much before, where it's like, okay, well, he's not had a good start to this game, and he's not even going to try. He's not even going to try and get back into it. Now I think that he's, had this little uptick towards the end of last year, as well as doing well here. I'm seeing better, like, it sounds so weird to say, but like, in-game posture, like the way that he kind of holds himself in the server, just from an eye test, just looks better. It's like it's like an inexplicable, but it just, I guess, just makes sense. And is actually a promising sign, because I want to see old Axel back, and we may get it. We, depending on how this team does in the next sort of 5 tournaments, I think there's a very good chance at regression again for Axel if the vibe isn't right.
Yeah, that's always a worry with a player who's had, like, kind of like sort of like the yips, like a sort of mental block that's held back their performance. It could always rear its ugly head again, but for now, yeah, very happy with what we saw from Axel. Honestly, overall, BetBoom looks as dangerous and as threatening as the roster really seemed to be when first we hear about Axel and Boomage coming in. A lot of us theorized immediately, like, yo, this is going to be real. This is going to be actually quite threatening.
I will say, I think Zorte is mid now, though, so take that for what you will.
In these 2 series, he has been mid, but to be honest, he didn't exactly end the year on a bright note either. So yeah, we'll see. Maybe they just come knocking for Molodoi eventually. Because I've been asking everyone to sign Molodoi for like 6 months now, but no one has. They should.
Yeah, there are other Ulpers out there.
Yeah, Tride's OP as well. Maybe there's another. I'm not going to get too deep into the tier 3 weeds, but yeah, there are some talented Russian-speaking Ulpers out there. That's for sure.
And I mean, the CIS just like constantly cranks out operas. Like, it is just kind of unreal. It's just like a never-ending tap of like promising operas that come out of that area.
We had the rich vein, towards when we discovered Munacy. We had Shiro. This was towards the Dexter sort of peaking sort of time. Then we had like a lull, and now we've got a fresh batch of like 19-year-olds who are actually kind of OP coming back through again. And I think, yeah, there's now some places you can go with it. Like, Art Frost just became available as well. He just got kicked off of Parry Vision for Jane.
Dude, talk about players who are just the most unlucky ever. It's got to be Art Frost, bro. It's got to be like, the dude was actually a solid offer for Spirit, but fair enough. They had an opportunity to get Chiro. It's like, well, shit. Like, all right, I get it. But then, like, you got dumped for Jane. Like, oh my God.
Yeah, because dusT becomes his coach, and then like a few months later, kicks him out for Jane.
That is despicable. Like,
I have to believe it's an atmosphere thing. I have to believe that. Because he's not bad enough to kick off the team, like, there has to be another reason.
He has to be a dick. That's basically what we're saying here. Like, there's no 2 ways about it. He can't keep getting kicked off of teams just off his play.
Getting kicked for Jabe and James not even going to be the IGL is like just so absurd, man. When I read that, I'm just like, God, Art Frost.
The Shiro one, excusable. That's
yeah. It's just like,
that's knock for device type shit.
Yeah. 100%.
This one is this is removing. This is like removing Nok for Cadian, I guess.
And then Cadian's not calling.
Yeah, weirdly enough. But a hybrid calling like duo of Kicker and Jame has been done by these guys before, so I wouldn't be surprised if there's more to it.
Yeah, I'm sure Jame will have some voice there for sure, even if he's not the main IGL.
Guys, we should save. Guys.
And you should also know that like at some point if Kicker's not feeling it, like he will just be like, Jame, take over. Like, that could happen for sure.
Yeah, I don't doubt it. That's going to be an option in the future, but yeah. Always an option for BetBoom to go digging through the lower levels of the Russian-speaking scene. I mean, I've got a full scouting report if they want it. There's a lot of really talented players down there. But okay, that's going to be our episode. Only 8 teams to go through on this one. Thank you, dusT, for joining us. A pleasure to have you on the show for the first time. Maybe again, second season of the year. Maybe we rerun all the guests. That'll be fun. But yeah.
There you go.
We can compare the 2 performances. But yeah, if you enjoyed, leave a like, leave a comment, tell us your thoughts on all these picks, sub for more content, and remember that members get access to more content and the right to vote. So pay me. We'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.